Well, hello. Welcome to Connect.Tech. I'm so excited to be here today. Really wish we were all at the Galleria, slightly hungover from the awesome speakers dinner and mingling in the hallways. I really miss all of you, but I'm thankful that I at least have a platform to still see your beautiful faces and chat with you during this presentation. For those of you that I've not had the privilege of meeting, I'm going to start out by telling you just a little bit about me. So, hi, I'm Valarie Regas. I'm a DevOps engineer at Airbus. I'm new in my career, about 2 years out from a coding bootcamp. You don't even want to ask me how one goes from a web dev bootcamp to working in DevOps. It's a wild ride, y'all. As you might have noticed by the images I've selected, the most important things in my world are my partner, who is my best friend, Michael. We have 3 incredible children, and I have the coolest sisters ever. I'm going to tell you 2 quick fun facts about me. One, as you can see from the image in the bottom center, that would be me officiating the marriage of my sister to my now brother. We only say in-law in my family if we hate you. So that's me. That's the one time I married my brother and my sister. Woo! If you'd like a wedding officiated, I'm your gal, ordained minister. And also, I have done judo for 24 years. I love my judo family almost as much as my real family. And if you'd ever like to learn how to fall, got a 3rd degree black belt, I can help you out. So enough about me. Let's talk about what brought us here. What is disaster recovery planning? Okay, it's a lot of things, but mostly it's anticipating the worst and thinking about everything that could go wrong. Now, why would I be passionate about this? In fact, I was asked to write a DR plan before the apocalypse began, and several people, when they were doling out assignments at the PI planning, made jokes about, like, who have you irritated to get stuck with this assignment? Well, joke's on them. Turns out I have complex PTSD, which, for those of you who didn't get a psych degree, is basically when you've had repeated trauma throughout your life. It rewires your brain to always think about what can go wrong. It basically makes me a walking DR plan. Things like I've been in 14 car accidents. So every time I'm in a car, I'm constantly anticipating every action of every driver around me. So when I was asked to do this assignment, it was just like, all right, man, hypervigilance and paranoia, that's my jam. So that's really all we're talking about. We're talking about, what do you need at work? What do you and your team, your company need to, at the end of the day, release a great product to your end users with minimal or no interruption, minimal or no financial impact? That's it, right? That's what we're talking about. Yes, it's about being prepared for bad things, right? If you write a DR plan and you don't make sure everyone on your team or everyone involved has access to it, has been trained on it, is really aware of what it contains, that can be a problem. So we're going to talk a lot about how to make sure that this plan is available to everyone who needs it and how to facilitate that. We're also going to talk about frequent drills and simulations and ways to make sure that it's like any perishable skill. If you don't practice it every so often, you're going to forget, or the technology involved will be out of date, or. Most of what we're going to talk about is trying to sort of mitigate problems before they happen, right? So I'm a mom, got 3 kids. I do a lot of, okay, what could go wrong today? Well, my child could vomit all over the car seat. He did today, by the way. So I should probably pack some extra clothes and Lysol wipes. This is pretty much, I'm going to teach you how to be a mommy. We're going to start on covering product and IT issues first, right? So the nuts and bolts of getting the actual product out to your end user. This is important. Now, for a lot of you engineers, if you are tasked with writing a DR plan, this is predominantly what you're going to be asked to do, right? You're probably not going to be asked to do a lot of building things, but a lot of us have worked either at startups or at sort of smaller subsidiaries of larger corporations. And that being the case, you don't always have a designated office manager to write other portions of the plan. So we are going to spend just a little bit of time at the end talking about being a value add to your company and your team, by also thinking about other things that can impact your ability to deliver good software. So we're going to jump right in. For those of you who know me, you won't be surprised. I want to talk about people first. People are my jam. So who's responsible for what? You're going to want to create a DR team. Now you've got some options for how you define who's responsible for what. In a company with high turnover, or a company that's so large not everyone knows everyone by name, or across sort of distributed team, just all sorts of reasons, you might want to go by role. So when it comes to who's responsible for declaring a disaster or declaring the need to implement your plan, you could say whoever is senior software engineer for the back-end team from this division is responsible for that. Great. However, if you're at a startup, smaller subsidiary, or if you just happen to be asked to write something just for your team, I think it's fine to go by name. It's just important that you update it. It's important to always designate a backup, but more than just designating a backup, make sure that that backup person has the same level of access to the things they'll be required to use as does the primary. So for example, at Airbus, we have some awesome toys that we make and we play with. We have an entire room in our office called the drone room, and it's exactly what it sounds like. We like to take the drones out, play with them in the park sometimes, back when we could work in the office. But only a select few people have access to that room. If I had designated someone who required access to that room as a backup for a task, that would be poor planning. So really think about who needs access to what things, not just physical location access, but who has access to keys, who has access to admin privileges, who has God mode on your cloud provider. These things matter. Who takes the lead, right? So we kind of casually mentioned, who declares that the plan needs to be enacted. Great. This matters because some people kind of panic, some people are more level-headed, some people aren't available after work hours for whatever reason. Some people are always on their machines. If you're going especially by person, not by role, these are things to kind of think about. The more things are specified, the higher likelihood people are going to jump in and do exactly what's expected of them. So, just like a vague disclaimer is nobody's friend, a vague plan leaves people a little bit of wiggle room to either not know what's expected or not do it. That's the mommy in me coming out. This is one that before I started working on mine hadn't really occurred to me. But who talks to the press? Depending on if your product is public, depending on if your product has SLAs with a whole bunch of other companies, it could be possible that someone needs to talk to the press or issue a press statement or just issue mass emails to users. There's a lot of different ways. When I say talk to the press, like who's going to be your public-facing or client-facing representative if there's a major outage? This is an important role, and this is especially one that you want someone or a role that can tackle it and make sure that your users know you're working on it, everything's going to be okay. But it's this role that hadn't occurred to me, so I thought I'd throw that out. Communication. Now, if you're working on a team that relies on Slack predominantly for your communication, and Slack goes down, that's a problem. If you use some other third-party chat communication tool and someone forgets to pay the bill, or a license expires, or it's important to have a list of everyone involved in the plan, in particular, and you need to basically lay out, okay, so for Sally, here is, we've got Slack and that's cool, but also here's her primary email, her secondary, her primary phone number. I don't have a secondary phone number. Every time someone's like, can I have your home number? I'm like, no, I live in 2020. I have a cell phone. But some people have work phones and personal phones. So get as much access to communication means as possible, and go ahead and designate the order of use. So it's just understood that our team communicates via GChat now. And if that goes down, if there's an outage, if there's a problem, if for whatever reason we cannot utilize that tool, if Google's having issues, it is understood our secondary means of communication is going to be primary email address. You want to make sure that this information is stored somewhere that's accessible if your primary chat tool is inaccessible. So Google Drive might not be the best place to have the only copy. It's actually worth, I think, going old school and printing out a copy in paper for everyone in the plan every time you update it, just so that everyone has access, even if something really unexpected happens. And we're not just talking about employees. We need to know the contact information for all service providers. Things, again, if, let's say, AWS goes down, I mean, it could happen, not that it ever has, but let's say a service provider is experiencing an outage. You don't just want to be like scrambling to Google the helpline. You want to know exactly who to call, the phone number, the email, the web address, even if it's, the status websites. Be a little bit anal retentive and thorough on this one so that in the moment when you're like, wait, is this our issue or is this Google? Is this us? Is this Azure? Like, what's going on? You've got a really quick means of finding out that information. If you don't own your building, if you've got a landlord, you want to know who to talk to there, not just for major catastrophes like tornado takes out half a building, but there's a water leak really close to like our servers. Who do you call? Who's maintenance? These are things that need to be easily accessible all the time. And updates. I mean, I know that I've had the same phone number for longer than I care to admit, but people change. People have turnover at work, phone numbers change, email addresses change, people get married, change their name, periodic updates. And depending on, your team size, your company size, blah, 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 I can't tell you the exact right number of months between updates. I would say quarterly would be about right for most people, but evaluate your team and see what works for y'all, especially if you have a high turnover company or a low turnover company. You might be a little more slack, but I think quarterly is probably about right to just verify this information is still correct. Okay, so let's get into this. So the first thing we're going to talk about is inventorying everything that you have that you really need. When we talk about inventorying hardware in particular, you're going to want to be a little bit anal retentive about this because if you have to invoke a warranty or get a replacement or really important to know exactly how many machines you have. And I'm talking get granular here. Like you don't have 10 developer machines. You have 6 MacBook Pros purchased in blank year with this inch screen. You have 4 PCs, they're this brand, here's how much RAM, and like you need to know exactly what you're replacing, especially if a non-technical person might need to replace them for you. This could matter. And who to call, like who's going to issue that replacement? Or who's going to issue a warranty, right? So is that an online process? What's the name of the warranty company? These sorts of things really important to have so that, again, if someone just gets this plan thrown in their lap, they know exactly what's going on. Very big deal. Serial numbers. I've mentioned developer machines, but I'm talking if you have any on-prem servers, you want to know everything about them and you want it documented thoroughly, up to and including if you've had any work done, like go granular here. Even if you have a data center, like it makes sense to know what they're housing and be a little bit on top of that as well. If you have to replace anything, this is very important. All of this information, including setting a budget for, are you going to be able to replace everything, and knowing where to go to get the replacements. So some companies don't have to worry about budget so much, and they can literally, if a machine is stolen, walk across the street to the Apple Store or the Best Buy, buy whatever they want, come back. Some companies, you can't get a replacement for X number of time because you have to submit a formal request through very specific channels. It's kind of a thing. It's really important to know, though, what your options are for replacements and what those processes are, especially for things, a developer machine, all right, yeah, that needs to be replaced, but does it need to be replaced right this second? Whereas, like your servers, they probably need to be replaced ASAP, and that's kind of a lengthy process. Speaking of, the number one piece of advice that I got when I was looking at the survey results from my awesome, hey, tell me about your worst disasters survey of way more experienced engineers, again, I kept getting person after person saying, either we had an automatic failover plan, things like when AWS S3 went down, because they had such a thorough plan and they tested it, it was literally like an hour before they had clusters up and running on a different cloud provider. That's huge. Like, I seriously wanted to sit on my couch reading this response and slow clap whoever that anonymous reporter was. Everyone's stack is different. Everyone's, are they on-prem? Are they in the cloud? What's deployed on them? Is everything, do you have a hybrid model? I can't tell you what your failover should look like. I can't tell you how to plan this one. I can tell you that you need to plan one. Do some research and figure out the best way to mitigate server issues in general. It's a really big one. Also, some great advice I got back was to monitor for unusual traffic. Prolonged DDoS attacks are a serious problem, both financially and as far as users having access. Make sure that part of your plan is to go ahead and instantiate really good monitoring, specifically network traffic monitoring. And look, are you having unexpected or prolonged spikes? Again, I can't tell you what you should be looking for because, I've worked on a product where we really expected spikes around natural disasters because our product involved cat response. So spikes didn't really register odd for us, but a prolonged spike, that would have registered as problematic. So look at your usual traffic, what you expect, what you think you should see, make sure you've got monitoring set up, and make sure that who's supposed to be getting those alerts is in your plan. Version control. Now this is one that, again, I can't tell you the right answer. I can tell you that there have been times where I really need to pull down the most current version of a repo and GitHub's having problems. It doesn't happen frequently, thank God, but it happens. So look at your version control, and do you want to do things like ask that everyone on certain teams, or at least all code owners of a certain repository, have the most current version pulled down every night, every week, every month, however often it makes sense for you. Or, obviously it's good practice to, when you start working in a particular repository, go ahead and make sure you're current. But if you can't do that, that's a problem. So maybe make it a rule that after you make significant changes, you pull in everyone else's changes. Figure out what works for your team, but make sure that even if GitLab, GitHub, Bitbucket, whatever you're using, make sure that you have the ability to somehow still work on your code. Because, again, I think GitHub's and most of the providers, I think that their DR plans are probably real thorough. You never know what's going to happen. We're living through a pandemic, guys. You never know. And then lastly, I want to talk about data. So for my money, data is the thing, data loss in particular, that really impacts the end user the most, right? So if you log into Amazon looking to do a little shopping and they're having some issues, if you're trying to check a dashboard for, if you're using a JFrog product and you get 503s for like 5-10 minutes, whatever. It would never happen to JFrog, but like if you're looking to just interact with a product and you run into temporary outage, it's irksome. It's irksome, but it's probably not angering or enraging. However, if you log in to Amazon looking to start a return process and they've lost all of your order history, now that's enraging. That's where we get really problematic here. So I would say active replication, and that can look like so many different things depending on, again, where your data is stored. Find a way to either /or actively replicate your data. If possible, have a fully mirrored site. Like, go ahead and have the ability to, if your product is down and it doesn't look like it's coming up anytime soon, let's fail over to this backup that is exactly the same. Obviously, it could be a pain in the butt to have that backup. It shouldn't be. You should be able to automate it being updated every time your product is. I know there's room for error, but anything you can do to anticipate and mitigate data loss, that's really important. That's arguably the most important thing that we talked about. I'm sure lots of people disagree with me, but data loss agitates the shit out of me. So let's talk about these value adds I talked about earlier, right? These are things that I think, especially before the pandemic, we didn't necessarily have to think about as engineers. Like, we can't work in the office, what's the big deal? Well, thanks pandemic, now we know that everyone being forced to work from home before would have been inconvenient. But everyone being forced to live at home and work from home and do school from home and be there all the time, this has presented some unique and really unprecedented trials for employees to go through. I mean, so I don't have it. I've heard so many worse setups than I have, but my partner and I, we're both in software. He's a kick-ass architect with a cool beard. We're both working from home, and we have 3 kids. We've got one that we're having to actually homeschool because he can't do them. That's not fair to him. We love him too much to do that to him. We have one that is kind of forced to stay in public school and do Zoom from 8 to 2, which presents a whole different set of trials and problems. And then we have a 1-year-old who really likes to just scream hysterically and or make huge messes. Us trying to figure out since March how we stay productive, how we stay engaged with work, and how we also be good parents, because let's face it, that matters more than anything in the world. That's a unique trial. So I'm not saying that you need to, look into the future and anticipate something like this. But I think that the pandemic has really run home that we need to be prepared for all the things that we can possibly imagine. And I'm not saying have a zombie apocalypse plan in your DR, but if you did, I personally would not mock you. If you can't work in the office, once we get through these couple of years of human history, once we're back to some semblance of a new normal, if it's possible, have a backup location. And maybe that looks like, a tornado took out part of the building, it caught on fire, we can't be there for a while. Everyone worked from home, but twice a week we're going to rent out an office share for meetings. Or maybe you're a startup, a really small team, and it looks like one of us owns a huge house. Let's set up makeshift offices, and on the days we have to have meetings or group work, let's all go there once a week. I mean, I don't know your team, but having a backup location already kind of in mind, prepared, makes things a little bit easier. Again, working from home, we really need to test this. I think that the whole last 6 months has really taught us something seems simple, like working from home, but what happens when the entire team has to be home? Are we sure that everyone has some place to work and they're able to share their video? Like, do a drill every now and then where everyone's just home. If possible, test for the next pandemic by having a soundtrack of a screaming toddler ready for every employee so they really get tested. Safety issues. Now these are ones that this is the complex PTSD talking, but there are some things that I thought about as the kind of person who just thinks about what could go wrong. Well, I live in the United States and I work in an office building. So if you work somewhere that, especially if there's not door security, especially if it's a higher likelihood that a stranger could just walk in, think about what you would do if there's an active shooter. Where would people go hide? Who would know, this cube bank goes to this room to hide, this cube bank goes to this room to hide, and designate team leaders. I don't know, like, depending on where you work, this may or may not be something you really need to think about. My sisters are both school teachers, so obviously they have to think about it. Other things that can shut down a building. Bomb threats, they happen, again, depending on where you work, and especially who else shares that building with you. It's a thing. And fire. Now, obviously, most buildings are going to have fire suppression systems. That's cool. A fire drill, even if it's only once a year or once every 6 months if you have really low turnover, like whatever. People should know what to do in the case of a fire, where the stairs are, especially if you work in the kind of building that's not really easy to know where the stairs are, right? Like, I think the fire plan on the building where I work, we did it one time and I thought, why are we doing a fire drill? Well, it's because there are meandering hallways and 12 different doors to go through, and yeah, we needed to do a fire drill. I was thankful we did it. And then there's human issues. Now, I got mocked a little bit because I wrote this plan early January. I had read about Wuhan on the news, and I'd read about it online, and I didn't yet think that we were going to be here, but it did get my brain kind of turning. Like, well, what if half of the team gets sick at the same time, or what if even just a large proportion, or what if all of the backend engineers are sick at the same time? Do we have other people who are kind of T-shaped in their skill set that can take up that slack? It's something to think about, especially now. Like, what do you do if this happens again? If there's a bioweapon, like there's all sorts of things that probably aren't going to happen. But this probably wasn't going to happen either, so maybe think about it. And then much more likely are the following two: too much PTO taken at the same time. If you have, especially a system where people are kind of punished for not taking their PTO, guess what? You could run into a situation where, if you only have 2 back-end engineers on a team, they might both be out for like a week or two at the same time. Who takes up that slack? Extended leaves, between parental leaves, if your company, offers them, between parental leaves and short-term disability leaves, there are all sorts of reasons that a few people from your team, key people on your team, might be out for 3, 6, 9, 12 weeks. What do you do? What's your stopgap plan? Are you in a position to hire contractors during that time? Are you just going to kind of redistribute the work? These are things that should probably be dealt with before one of your teammates gets in a car wreck, or before their wife's having a baby and they're taking paternity leave. Think about these things now. Again, if you're being asked to make a DR plan for just your little team or just for the engineering side, cool. You don't need to worry about this slide at all. But if your little company doesn't have a DR plan that covers these things, it can be a serious value add and make you kind of stand apart as a leader to think about these things ahead of time. And especially if something along this ilk happens and you've already written a plan and you're able to take charge, woot, you're just ahead of the game. Okay, so most of the random advice I'm about to give you came from survey results, and I just thought it was too good not to share. So the first thing is, not all of your dependencies are equal, right? So we talked about the hardware and software that you need to deliver your product to your user. Some things you cannot function without it. Like, some things have to work right now. Some things, if a developer has a machine that's not working correctly, that's not a, oh, go to the store and buy a new one right this second, Mr. Man. You can fill out a ticket with IT or whatever your process is. This can take a day, this can take 2 days, and yes, it's wasted resource hours, but not the end of the world. Some things, there's a slow water leak. That's not a rush right out, hunt down a plumber, drag him back to the office, and fix it. That's place a phone call, send an email, make sure that your maintenance manager or whoever's in charge of building repairs knows, hey, this has to be addressed right now, but right now might be a couple days from now. Don't freak out. Not everything in your plan has to be fixed right now. Kind of think about how imperative it is for that to be functioning. In a similar vein, not everything is equally likely, right? So the odds of GitHub being down for an hour, so your resources are maybe frustrated and inconvenienced, a lot more likely than, I don't know, GitHub being down for a week. The likelihood of people not being able to work in the office because a tornado hit it, way more likely, depending on where you live geographically, than an active shooter, even if you live in America. Other things, like the odds of data loss from, I think one person in the survey shared that utility workers outside of a data center basically took down the whole center by accidentally digging through some fiber optic wires that were, or cables that were buried underneath, underground. Like, does that happen? Sure. Is it incredibly likely? Not really. So as you're looking at all the different scenarios and things that can go wrong and bad things that could happen, really look at probability and impact. If you, especially if you're just trying to get this plan written, really focus on the things that are both highly probable and have a high impact. It's hard to do, especially for people like me, but it's important to remember that not everything bad that can happen is actually going to happen. And statistically speaking, it probably won't, to you anyway, and not everything has the same level of impact. So I know I've kind of been like, so you're going to lose all your data and be shot at work. No, not really. Not really. Keep that in mind when you're doing this so you don't get a little too upset. And testing is key, guys. Like, testing is the thing, right? You want to test the plan at set intervals. And I mean really test it. One of the coolest experiences I had early on in my first role was we simulated a hurricane to basically do some simulated usage spikes and see how our product responded. And the simulated hurricane not only ended up being a lot of fun for everyone involved, but it showed us a lot of pain points so we could sort of mitigate before anything bad happened, before hurricane season. And testing out under real circumstances, or as the pandemic has made it apparently necessary, think of how you can test the plan both realistically and maybe with some unlikely hurdles, right? So maybe, we're going to test out what happens not only if we're having this outage, but we're having this outage and only half the team can help. The wrong half. What would they do? Let's test it. Let's give everyone the tools, in theory, to start handling it and see if they can. And if not, let's make a plan to get them up to where they can. Most importantly, just test it again and again and again and again, as much as you can, and keep it current. Make sure that every time you revise it, every quarter when you update your plan, you do a lesson learned, everyone knows what is their job, and then test it. So I want to thank you for letting me share this with you. Just being asked to write a plan at work and having to do the appropriate research to do so was eye-opening on how many different things people have to account for when they write these plans. It's been a lot of fun learning about. And if you want to write one but you're not nearly as geeky and passionate as I am about it, IBM has a really great free template that you can just Google easily and pops right up. A lot of the free templates out there are going to be associated with DR firms or software products or. So if you're just looking for a template to help you knock it out, IBM gives that out for free, worth looking up. I'm always happy to connect with people. I love to meet other people in my awesome community, and I'm just really thankful that we're still having conferences, if only from afar. And if only because I think that Pratik and Vincent might judge me if I were drinking wine on stage at the real Connect.Tech. Anyway, I am so excited to do some Q&A now and get to talk to everyone. I hope you've enjoyed it. I certainly have.